In the lead up to the 2019 World Championships, the broadcast talent as well as the analysts, the pundits, the talking heads on the talk shows set up the narrative for the tournament rather properly. You had this group draw coming up, and after seeing this, people were saying that, remember, from the previous year, China was the World Championship region. IG had looked absolutely unstoppable before falling in the semifinals of that year's MSI to Team Liquid. So China was still very much in recent memory the strongest region. Therefore, the Chinese first seed FPX were called the primary favorites for this tournament. The secondary favorite, almost on the same level, was supposed to be G2 Esports, having won the MSI of that year and also having looked very dominant in the summer split of their native LEC region. These were the two favorites of this tournament. Outside chances at the title were supposed to be SK Telecom T1 and Griffin from Korea. Both these teams had looked very good domestically, and SKT had looked very competitive with G2 at the MSI, then taken a bit of a dip in performance domestically, but then after changing out their support player Mata for effort, they had looked absolutely elite and were also considered as contenders for the World Championship title in this year. That was the narrative set up before the tournament, and it was a pretty accurate one. Now looking into how the groups play out. And after this group stage, we can see Griffin had actually topped the group over G2 Esports, taking 2 out of the 3 games against them. SK Telecom T1 had won their group rather easily, and FPX had struggled early on in their considered very weak group, but then come back in week 2 and also won 2 out of the 3 games against Splice to secure the first slot in their Group B. For Group D, also the Korean team in Damwon Gaming topped the group over IG, who had fallen off after their strong MSI group stage showing. And this was pretty much not a surprise to many people, but also Damwon Gaming looked rather strong going into the knockout stage. So then, after the knockout stage commences, we have this quarterfinals draw, and immediately there's, for all these matchups, there's a clear favorite except the Griffin IG one. These were two very strong teams considered of equal strength, but Griffin looked much better in the group stage and throughout the whole year basically after MSI. Griffin was supposed to win that one, but ended up losing to IG in this quarterfinal. So the quarterfinals go by and people say, yeah, G2 Esports, they slammed Korea's third seed Damwon Gaming. Looked really good there. SKT easily took care of Splice. These two favorites still very much on track to win the tournament. FPX, after the group stage where they looked shaky in week 1, pretty easily beat Fnatic. There was really no chance of Fnatic winning that best of 5. And IG sort of upsets Griffin in their quarterfinals matchup. Then, moving into the semifinals, people are so hyped to see G2 Esports versus SK Telecom T1. The rematch from the MSI semifinals, SKT have ramped up. Everybody's excited to see another 5-game series between these two teams. And on the other side, we have two very strong teams from China, but FPX is the clear-cut favorite because they look just that much better in their domestic play. The only thing IG has going for them is their recent upset in the quarterfinals against a very young and inexperienced Griffin team. So naturally, in that best of 5, FPX prevailed. It was an interesting series. Both teams played very aggressive, constantly scrapping, not the cleanest of series. But then on the other side, we have G2 Esports versus SKT. And during that series, people get so hyped, so excited, that they start calling it the real finals of that World Championship. This was such an irresponsible thing to do, but somehow everybody bought into it. I agree that this was a great series, and G2 Esports found some very creative solutions to the game states they were put into, or they put themselves into, more accurately, and they looked very good in their win over SK Telecom T1. But why, after this series, do we suddenly have to discredit FPX for everything they've done? The only thing that's a knock on FPX was their week 1 group stage performance, after which they have looked completely like their former selves, dominating every matchup they had gotten. So why is suddenly G2 Esports and SKT both supposed to be better than FPX when we've not even seen any of these two teams play a game against the Chinese first seed? And China was still considered to be the best region in the world at this point. How is it that Korea versus EU was the real finals of that World Championship? Well, people got to find out rather quickly, because before the finals were played, people were putting G2 Esports suddenly as the favorites to win it all because, and I quote the Riot broadcast here, they looked like a World Championship team. When we saw them play, it felt like watching a World Championship team play, a World Champion team play. What is that supposed to mean? That doesn't mean anything, really. And no matter how good G2 Esports played in that series, if you don't then talk about how FPX played, that doesn't have any bearing on their direct matchup. G2 Esports might have played perfectly, but if FPX played just as perfectly in their own series, that would then mean that why would G2 Esports then be a favorite? See what I mean? People, of course, were coming from an analytic side as well, saying that FPX versus IG was scrappy and G2 Esports is a good team at responding to these, to these aggressions from this team, always finding creative solutions. Though I'm not saying that people completely threw logic overboard and jumped on the hype train, but they were still very much careless in doing so. And I'm not saying that it's crazy to say G2 Esports might have been the favorite in these finals or could have won these finals beforehand, because they had looked good all year long and in this tournament especially, taking out two Korean teams back to back in best of fives. But how can you discredit the number one seed from the strongest region that easily? Now, in the finals, of course, the Chinese fans, the Chinese teams got their redemption. They completely swept G2 Esports, and people really felt, well, proven wrong afterwards. The real finals of this World Championship was the finals. These were the two best teams considered before the tournament and during the tournament, and FPX simply on that day was way better than G2 and probably were most of the time gonna win that final. Well, that was a one-time occurrence, and I get how people got caught up in the hype for G2 Esports at this tournament. It was the first time that somebody legitimately thought Europe should win the World Championship title. But then we move into the next year, and this is the group draw we get. Now, again, let's set up the stakes for this tournament. The expectations beforehand were G2 Esports again won both splits in Europe, but didn't look as dominant in doing so. Still, people expected them to ramp up when it mattered the most and perform at the World Championship stage once more. So G2 Esports once more a favorite for the title. Then we have, of course, the number one seed from China, Top Esports in Group D. Again, number one seed from China, looked great. Not really much to argue against them here. They were considered to be a strong team as well. And sadly, there was no MSI held this year, so we couldn't really tell how the regions matched up halfway through the year. In Group B, we have the second seed from China, JDG, and many people argued they were just as strong as Top Esports. They had gone neck and neck with them for most of the year, had even won the spring split, and then narrowly lost out in the summer split. So people were saying China is sending two extremely strong teams in Top Esports and JDG. Then from Korea we had the number one seed Damwon Gaming, and they looked stellar all year long. People were considering them to be right up there with the world's best. So these were the four favorites for the tournament: G2, Damwon Gaming, Top Esports, Jingdong Gaming. Really, these were the only four teams people were giving a real shot. So let's see how the group stages played out. Well, our favorites, Damwon Gaming, looking very good in their group, winning it. Jingdong Gaming also looking quite good. And then falling short against Damwon Gaming, of course, but still a good group stage performance and a respectable second place finish considering who they were up against. Top Esports in their group, no issues whatsoever, topped it as well. And then in Group A, interestingly enough, Suning looked just as good as G2 Esports. These teams were very much 50-50. If you wanted to give the slight edge to anybody, it would have to have been Suning, but it was still reasonable to say at this point that Suning and G2 were probably about at the same level, but if anybody was better, it was probably Suning. So, what happens in the bracket stage for this World Championship? Well, Top Esports struggles immensely against Fnatic. complete underdog, and Fnatic almost takes the series, then gets reverse swept by top esports. I'm sure all of you still remember how that series felt watching as a Western fan, as a European fan, probably. Then in the other quarterfinals, Jingdong Gaming, one of the 4 pre-tournament favorites, gets upset by Suning 3-1, and it didn't look close. This was a big deal because, as you see, the 3 Chinese teams that are remaining in this tournament are on the same side of the bracket, and suddenly one of the Elite 2 is getting taken out by their 3rd seed. This was a very surprising result, especially for people who had watched the LPL regionally. G2 Esports completely sweeps through Gen.G, finally ramping up in this tournament, people thought, and well, justifiably so, because yeah, they were considered favorites and they took care of Gen.G easily. And in the last quarterfinals, Damwon Gaming takes out their weaker brothers from DRX, just like in their own domestic region. Really no chance for any other Korean team to contest Damwon. Now we move into the semifinals, and what do you know? People once more are calling it the real finals. And why? I mean, this time it's sort of reasonable, because the number 1 team from Europe, the number 1 team from Korea, and as I mentioned before, both these teams were considered to be contenders for the title before the tournament started. But you might recognize the pattern here. LPL is not in this match, and the LPL across the last 2 years have been the team with the region with the consistently best teams. So why is this again the real finals in the semi-final? G2 Esports in this one disappointed a bit, took a game of Damwon Gaming, but Damwon Gaming were the clearly better team in this series, and they moved to the finals. People again call it early, especially because the other Elite 2 team from China, Top Esports, got taken out by Suning. Never mind looking at Suning's gameplay, looking better than G2 in the group stage, and then taking out the 2 completely, well, the dominant Chinese teams from their own region. And remember, at this point, taking out Chinese teams in best of 5s is completely unheard of. Nobody does that. Nobody does that at the World Championship at this point in time. China doesn't lose to foreigners. So Suning looking immensely scary moving into the finals, but never mind that, it's called early for Damwon Gaming anyway, because they played the real finals already in the semis against G2. Now this time around, the narrative seems to hold true, because Damwon Gaming almost sweeps Suning, just like they almost swept G2, so you could say, well, yeah, then maybe G2 Esports was the 2nd best team. No, they were not the 2nd best team at the tournament, and they themselves will be the first ones to tell you that. And even if they were, Suning was pretty much on the same level as them. And Suning had taken out the other 2 favorites. So how you cannot consider them a worthy opponent for Damwon Gaming in these finals is absolutely beyond me. Also, if we compare the 2 series from Damwon against G2 and then against Suning, Suning did put up the better fight. Let's not kid ourselves here. I was a big G2 Esports fan at this point. I was rooting for them big time, but watching Suning vs Damwon in the final was a great fucking series, and Suning did not disappoint at all. That mainly being due to their underdog role, of course, unlike G2 in the series prior. But then again, it was a World Championship finals, and it was a hype series, despite Damwon being the better team again and deservingly winning it. So again in this one, that's the 2nd World Championship in a row where the finals was called early, and the semi-final matchup between Europe and Korea was supposed to be the real finals, with everybody ignoring that LPL is the best region across these 2 years. Please, now moving into the 3rd consecutive World Championship with China looking the strongest region, please don't do it again, analysts, Riot Broadcast, pundits on your talk shows. Please, the good job that you're doing before the tournament, keep it up during it, and remember that the LPL is always supposed to have at least 1 team that's contending or favorite for the title, and please don't call the tournament before all LPL teams are eliminated. Thank you very much.